So I have no idea how my PC survived this. So basically, around 2 days ago I noticed that my fans on the case were running at full speed basically, at all times, and I couldn't figure out why. So I thought it was just, it's 40 degrees outside, it's probably because of that. But then my PC just turned off. So I'm like, wait, is it overheating? So I looked at the CPU temperature and it was 100 degrees. So I kind of freaked out a little bit, and I looked at the fan speed and the fan wasn't, it just was not available. So I looked inside the actual case and the fan wasn't spinning. So I kind of freaked out a little bit, so I turned the PC off. I opened up the case. I had no idea what was wrong with it. So I'm like, okay, let's diagnose this and see what's wrong with it. So I unplugged the CPU fan cable. I put it into a different one of the case fans connectors, and it didn't work. So I'm like, okay, this is not looking good. So then I put one of the case fans into the CPU cooler connectors, and it worked. So with that, I concluded that the issue was the CPU fan. So then I remembered that I have a few spare fans around somewhere. Now I do have 3 different fans that are the same size, which is 120 millimeter. But the problem is, those were case fans. So they had a completely different connection, because they were supposed to go into an RGB module and then being plugged in to the motherboard. So then I looked for other options, and I saw that I have a fan from the same brand, well, which has the same 4-pin connector, but it was slightly bigger than the heatsink. I believe it was 140 millimeter. But just to test things out, I put that against the heatsink. I turned the PC on, and I get this error. So I'm like, okay, something's weird, because it's definitely connected and it's definitely spinning. So I went into BIOS and set the CPU fan monitoring to ignore, basically. So then it booted up. It was in the loading screen, well, not the loading screen, the lock screen. So I'm like, okay, now I need to find a way to temporarily secure this to the heatsink until I get a replacement. So I get a brilliant idea of using some metal wire to secure the fan to the heatsink, this is how it looked like. Yeah, so I didn't want to do this with the PC running, so I turned it off. I secured the wire, but then the PC wouldn't boot up anymore. So I thought that was really weird. I had no idea what was wrong with it. It was just, how usually the LED on the monitor is either blue or green when it's on, but then when you turn this off, it switches to either red or amber. So basically it was just like the monitor was off, and I had no idea what was wrong with this thing. So I'm like, is my GPU cooked now? Because that's gotta be annoying to deal with. So then I got the DisplayPort cable out of the GPU and I plugged it directly into the motherboard and see if that worked. And it didn't. So I'm like, okay, this is really weird. Is it the port? So I got it. So I switched from DP1 to DP2 on the monitor and the motherboard as well. And that also didn't work. So I'm like, what the hell is wrong with this thing? So I thought, okay, maybe it's the cable. So I got my old HDMI cable out and I plugged that in instead. And it actually worked. With one exception. This happened. And I have no idea why. Maybe because of all the restarts and yeah, so that was annoying. And I'm like, okay, I think I do have a Windows 11 drive somewhere. So I started looking for it. I found what I thought was a USB drive with Windows 11. So the problem is I don't really have a way to check what's on the drive because I don't have a second computer or a laptop, and I don't have a adapter for my phone to read it. So I'm like, okay, there goes nothing. So I tried recovering, and it didn't work. So then I'm like, okay. I tried a second USB drive that I had. I mean, thing is, I know for sure one of them has Windows 10 and the other has Windows 11. So eventually, that just didn't work. Like nothing worked. Safe mode didn't work. None of it. So then I'm like, okay, I gotta be sure I have Windows 11 on this drive. So I borrowed one of my friend's laptop to basically make another USB to be sure that that's not the issue. So I did. He has a really old laptop, so it took a while for me to download that thing and make the drive. So then, but eventually I've done it. I tried again and it still didn't work. So I'm like, what the hell is wrong with this thing? So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna just boot from the drive. Like I kind of just gave up. I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna do a clean install of Windows, and yeah, it is what it is. But that didn't work because I just couldn't get to the menu. I couldn't just boot up from the drive and just reinstall a clean version of Windows. But then I remember I also reset the BIOS because I thought that was the issue for some reason. So I went back into the BIOS, changed a few things, and I was also able to format both SSDs from the BIOS. So then one eternity later, there it was, the Windows 11 install. So I just installed it basically. And afterwards, you get that startup menu when you choose your language, region, and you have to connect to the internet. Now there is no option to skip connected to the internet. And the thing is, I do have Wi-Fi on this motherboard, but it obviously doesn't work without the driver. So we wouldn't see my network. So I'm like, bruh. So then, I remember I have a Wi-Fi adapter, so I plugged that in, a USB Wi-Fi adapter, and it saw my network. But for some reason, I just wasn't able to connect to it. So that was really annoying, because I tried everything. I tried making a hotspot on my phone and connecting to that instead. It didn't work. So I'm like, there has to be a way to bypass this, and I found one. I basically had to open command prompt and write a bypass command, so I would have to connect to the internet. So then the PC rebooted again. It went to the same menu, but this time there was an option with I don't have internet. So I'm like, okay, there it is. And then I did the classic, using my phone as internet, connect via USB, so I could download the Windows updates and all the drivers and that kind of stuff, and get it all set back together. So then I still have this temporary solution, right? So I'm like, okay. And it was like 4 in the morning, so I'm like, okay, I'll just go to bed, I'll deal with this when I wake up. So I went to bed. The next day, I'm like, okay, time to look for a new CPU cooler. So I found one at a electronics store where I actually bought my previous PC. So I'm like, okay, they have the exact model. Perfect, so I can just take the fan, put it on the heatsink, and I don't have to take anything off. This was perfect, or so I thought. The problem is, there was some national holiday, so the store was closed. So the issue was, because I kept looking, the issue was either the store was closed, or if it was open, they wouldn't have this. Because I went to some electronics store. I'm like, hey, do you have CPU coolers? They're like, oh yeah, we have these things. So I looked. They were like literally Chinese coolers. I'm like, yeah, I'm not putting this into my PC. So I left. Eventually, my friend found one that was supposedly open 24/7. So I'm like, okay, they had a phone number, so I called them like, hey, I need a CPU cooler for an AM5 socket. They're like, okay, let me see. Unfortunately, we don't have this. So I'm like, bruh. So I ended up ordering a different one, because I found the same one on the internet, but it would take 2 days to be delivered. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not waiting 2 days. So I got a different model, but the same fan size. So I'm like, oh, maybe I could just change the fan so I don't have to take the heatsink off. and that thing had next day delivery, which was perfect. So I ordered that, and then I was just waiting for it to arrive, and this is the final result. Yeah, sure, the cables look horrible, because I should have put it like 180 degrees the other way, but yeah, I kind of didn't care enough. This is supposed to be a temporary solution till I get an AIO. Hopefully, probably, maybe. So like, honestly, I have no idea how the PC survived at 100 degrees CPU temperature for about 2 days, because it took me 2 days to realize that something was wrong. So it must be a really good CPU. Either that or the 5 fan cases that I have provided just enough airflow for the CPU not to melt. But yeah, this is the story of how my PC almost died. So yeah, thank you guys for listening.